25 years ago, during a violent winter storm, two baby girls entered the world. Twin sisters, born only 3 minutes apart. Same eyes, same tiny hands, same heartbeat that had shared one home for 9 months. Meanwhile, their parents, Michael and Laura Bennett, couldn't stop smiling because after years of trying, their miracle finally arrived. Not one child, two. But fate had other plans. Only hours after birth, Michael drove through a snowstorm trying to bring supplies to hospital, and suddenly a truck lost control on icy road. The crash was devastating. Michael died instantly. Meanwhile, inside hospital, Laura received terrible news. Her husband was gone, and the shock nearly destroyed her. Days later, another tragedy followed. Massive medical bills, dead, no family support, no income, nothing. Laura desperately tried keeping both daughters, but life became impossible. One evening, social services arrived, and during chaotic legal confusion, something happened that should never have happened. The twins were separated. One baby was adopted by wealthy businessman Richard Anderson and his wife Victoria. They named her Charlotte Anderson. Meanwhile, the other baby remained with Laura. Her name became Emma Bennett. And from that day forward, their lives traveled in completely different directions. Charlotte grew up inside enormous mansion, private schools, luxury vacations, designer clothes, everything money could buy. People called her lucky, perfect life, perfect future, perfect opportunities. Meanwhile, Emma grew up inside tiny apartment, secondhand clothes, part-time jobs, bills piling every month, watching her mother work 3 jobs just to survive. But despite poverty, Laura loved Emma with all her heart. Every birthday, every Christmas, every difficult day. Then one night, when Emma was 10 years old, she discovered something strange. Old photograph hidden inside a drawer. The pictures showed her as baby, but there were 2 babies, not one. Emma immediately looked confused, then asked softly, "Mom, who is the other baby?" Laura instantly froze, because suddenly the secret she buried for years stood in front of her. Tears filled her eyes, but she wasn't ready telling the truth yet. Instead, she quietly whispered, "Someone very important." Emma never forgot that answer. Meanwhile, across the country, Charlotte stared at similar photograph hidden inside Anderson family documents, and she asked the same question. "Why do I look exactly like this baby?" But nobody answered her either, because some secrets stay hidden for years until fate decides otherwise. And 25 years later, one accidental meeting inside coffee shop would change both lives forever. 25 years later, Emma Bennett rushed through downtown Chicago carrying coffee and stack of work documents. Late again, bills waiting, rent overdue, and another long shift ahead. Life never seemed slowing down. Meanwhile, across the same city, Charlotte Anderson stepped out of luxury black car wearing designer coat and expensive sunglasses. Everything around her looked perfect. Successful career, beautiful apartment, money, status. Yet somehow, she still felt something missing, a strange emptiness she could never explain. Because deep down, Charlotte always sensed part of her life remained hidden, especially after finding that mysterious baby photograph years ago. Meanwhile, Emma entered a crowded coffee shop trying to escape cold weather. The place overflowed with people, students, business professionals, tourists, and suddenly, someone bumped into her. Coffee spilled, documents scattered everywhere. "Oh my God!" Emma immediately bent down, collecting papers. Meanwhile, the other woman apologized quickly. "I'm so sorry." Then both women looked up, and the world stopped. For several seconds, nobody moved, nobody spoke, because staring back at Emma was her own face. Same eyes, same smile, same hair color, same features, everything. The coffee shop became strangely silent around them. Meanwhile, Charlotte stared in complete shock too, because suddenly she felt like looking into a mirror. Finally, Emma laughed nervously. "This is weird." Charlotte nodded immediately. "Very weird." People nearby secretly stared now, because honestly, the resemblance looked impossible. Then, suddenly, an elderly woman sitting nearby whispered softly, "They could be twins." The sentence hit both women like lightning. Twins. Meanwhile, Emma instantly remembered the old photograph hidden in a drawer years ago. The photograph showing two babies, not one. And for first time, the memory suddenly felt important. Meanwhile, Charlotte remembered the same photograph she found inside family records, and her heart began racing, because suddenly, questions buried for decades returned. Then, softly, Charlotte asked, "Do you have any siblings?" Emma slowly shook her head. "Not that I know of." Long pause. Then Emma asked, "What about you?" Charlotte looked away briefly. "I was adopted." The words instantly changed everything. Emma froze completely, because suddenly, pieces started fitting together. Then, quietly, she whispered, "When were you born?" Charlotte answered, "December 14th, 1999, 10:42 p.m. Emma immediately went pale, because that was her birthday too. Same date, same year, same time. The world suddenly felt unreal. Meanwhile, Charlotte noticed Emma trembling, then softly asked, "What's wrong?" Emma reached for phone shakily, opened old photographs saved from childhood, then showed it. Charlotte instantly gasped, because it was identical to the photograph she kept hidden at home. Two babies, wrapped in hospital blankets, lying side by side. And suddenly, both women realized impossible truth. The stranger standing before them wasn't a stranger. She was family, real family. Meanwhile, tears slowly filled Emma's eyes, because all those years, all those questions, all those mysteries finally had an answer. Then quietly she whispered, "I think you're my sister." Charlotte immediately covered her mouth, because for 25 years she believed she was alone, and now fate had placed the missing half of her life directly in front of her. Neither woman noticed. Across the street, someone watching them from a parked car, an older woman, Laura Bennett. And the moment she saw them standing together, she started crying uncontrollably, because after 25 years, her daughters had finally found each other. Across the street, Laura Bennett sat inside her old car, crying uncontrollably, because after 25 years, the moment she prayed for every night had finally happened. Emma and Charlotte stood together, side by side, just like they were supposed to be from the beginning. Meanwhile, inside the coffee shop, neither sister noticed their mother watching, because both remained trapped inside shock. Questions exploded inside their minds. How? Why? What happened? Meanwhile, Charlotte sat down slowly, hands shaking, heart racing, because for 25 years she believed she was only child, and suddenly she had sister, real sister, a twin. Meanwhile, Emma couldn't stop staring. Every smile, every expression, every movement, everything felt familiar, like looking at another version of herself. Then, softly, Charlotte asked, "Do you know anything about our parents?" Emma hesitated, then quietly answered, "My father died before I could remember him." Charlotte immediately froze, because her adoption records said the exact same thing. Meanwhile, outside the coffee shop, Laura closed her eyes painfully because every word brought old memories back. The hospital, the paperwork, the confusion, the mistake that destroyed her family. 25 years earlier, after Michael's death, Laura had fallen into depression. Massive debt followed, then legal chaos. Social services became involved, and during emergency custody procedures, Charlotte was separated from her. At first, Laura believed it was temporary, just a few months, until she recovered financially. But months became years, and years became impossible. The adoption finalized before she could stop it. Meanwhile, Laura spent every year fighting guilt. Every birthday, every Christmas, every family holiday. One daughter beside her, one daughter missing. Then, suddenly, inside coffee shop, Emma received phone call. Laura. Emma looked surprised because her mother rarely called during work hours. Meanwhile, Laura stared at phone, trembling, because after 25 years, the secret could no longer stay hidden. The call connected. "Mom?" Emma smiled softly. "Everything okay?" For several seconds, Laura couldn't speak, only cried. Meanwhile, Emma instantly became worried. "Mom? What's wrong?" Then, finally, through trembling voice, Laura whispered, "Turn around." Emma looked confused, then slowly turned toward window and immediately froze, because across the street stood Laura, crying, smiling, trembling, looking directly at both daughters. Meanwhile, Charlotte followed Emma's gaze, and suddenly the world stopped, because somehow the older woman's eyes looked exactly like theirs. Same eyes, same smile, same face shape, family resemblance impossible ignoring. Then, softly, Laura crossed street, step by step, 25 years of fear following her. Meanwhile, Emma stood motionless, because deep down she already knew, and so did Charlotte. Finally, Laura stopped in front of their table, tears falling freely now. Then, through broken voice, she whispered, "My girls." The sentence shattered everyone, because suddenly all questions had answer. The stranger wasn't stranger, she was their mother. Charlotte immediately covered her mouth. Emma began crying uncontrollably, and Laura, after 25 years of guilt, looked at both daughters together for the first time since they were newborns. Then, softly, Laura whispered, "I've been looking for you my entire life." And for the first time in 25 years, their family finally stood in the same room again. For several minutes, nobody moved. Nobody spoke, because 25 years of separation stood between them. Meanwhile, Laura stared at Charlotte, the daughter she hadn't held since infancy, the daughter she thought about every single day, the daughter she believed she might never see again. Tears streamed down her face uncontrollably. Then softly, she whispered, "You're beautiful." Charlotte immediately broke down crying, because for 25 years, she dreamed hearing words like that from her real mother. Not because Richard and Victoria didn't love her, they did. But deep down, Charlotte always felt something missing, a piece of herself, a question nobody could answer. Meanwhile, Emma sat silently, watching everything unfold. Part of her felt happy, part of her felt confused, and another part felt scared, because suddenly her family wasn't only hers anymore. Now there was Charlotte, too. Meanwhile, Laura reached into purse slowly, then pulled out old photograph. The same photograph taken in hospital 25 years ago. Both twins together. Tiny newborn babies, wrapped in pink blankets. Charlotte immediately recognized it, because she owned exact same picture. for years without understanding why. Then quietly, she asked, "Why didn't you find me sooner?" The question hit Laura hard because, honestly, she asked herself same thing every day. Then softly, through tears, Laura told entire story. The accident, Michael's death, the debt, the legal confusion, the adoption, and 25 years of searching afterward. Meanwhile, Charlotte listened silently. No anger, no blame, only sadness. Because suddenly, she realized her mother never abandoned her willingly. Life simply tore them apart. Then softly, Charlotte whispered, "I thought nobody wanted me." Laura immediately grabbed her hand and cried harder because hearing those words broke her heart completely. Then firmly said, "No, never. There wasn't a single day I stopped loving you." Meanwhile, Emma wiped tears quietly because she knew Laura was telling truth. She saw it her entire life, every birthday, every Christmas, every year when Laura stared at old photograph and cried. Then suddenly, Charlotte smiled sadly and whispered, "Can I tell you something?" Laura immediately nodded. Meanwhile, Charlotte took deep breath, then softly said, "I grew up in a mansion." The room became quiet because everyone expected perfect life story, luxury, success, happiness. Meanwhile, Charlotte continued, "I had private schools, beautiful vacations, everything money could buy." Then her voice broke slightly. "But every birthday, I wished for family." Laura immediately covered her mouth because suddenly she understood something painful. Money gave Charlotte comfort, but not answers, not identity, not belonging. Meanwhile, Charlotte smiled through tears. "I used to look at that baby picture every night." Long pause. "And wonder who the other baby was." Emma immediately began crying again because all those years she wondered exactly the same thing. Then suddenly, Charlotte looked at Emma, her twin, the sister she never knew existed, and softly laughed. "Turns out, it was you." The three women laughed and cried at same time, because sometimes happiness and sadness arrive together. Meanwhile, outside the coffee shop, the sun slowly began setting. Golden light filled windows, and for first time in 25 years, Laura sat between both daughters, one raised in poverty, one raised in wealth, yet somehow both carrying same emptiness, the emptiness only family could fill. Then quietly, Charlotte reached across the table and held Emma's hand, then Laura's, and whispered, "I think we have a lot of lost time to make up for." Neither Emma nor Laura let go, because after 25 years apart, they finally found what was missing: each other. That evening, Charlotte sat alone inside her luxury apartment. The city lights glowed beyond enormous windows. Everything looked beautiful. Everything looked successful. Yet, for the first time in years, her mind wasn't focused on work, or money, or business meetings. Only one thing: family. Meanwhile, on coffee table before her sat 3 photographs, one of Richard and Victoria Anderson, one of Emma and Laura, and one old baby picture showing 2 newborn twins. Charlotte stared at them quietly, because suddenly her life felt divided into 2 different stories: the family who raised her and the family she had just found. Meanwhile, across town, Laura couldn't stop crying, not from sadness, from relief, because for 25 years, she imagined this reunion thousands of times, and somehow, reality felt even more emotional. Then suddenly, Charlotte picked up phone, hands trembling slightly, and called Richard, her adoptive father, the man who raised her, the man she called Dad for 25 years. The phone rang twice, then connected. "Charlotte?" Richard sounded cheerful, but immediately noticed something unusual. "Are you okay?" Meanwhile, Charlotte wiped tears quickly, then softly answered, "Dad, I need telling you something." An hour later, Charlotte arrived at her childhood home. The mansion looked exactly same. Large gates, perfect gardens, warm lights glowing from windows. Home. Meanwhile, Richard and Victoria waited inside living room, concern visible on both faces, because Charlotte rarely sounded emotional. Then finally, she told them everything. The coffee shop, Emma, Laura, the photographs, the truth. And for several minutes, nobody spoke because the revelation stunned them completely. Meanwhile, Victoria slowly began crying, not because she was angry, not because she was afraid, because suddenly she realized something heartbreaking. Charlotte finally found answers she searched for entire life. Then softly, Victoria asked, "Do you want leave us?" The question shattered Charlotte immediately, because suddenly she understood their fear. The people who raised her feared losing her, just as Laura once lost her. Without hesitation, Charlotte rushed forward, then hugged both of them tightly, and through tears whispered, "No, never." Richard immediately closed his eyes emotionally, because deep down, he feared this exact moment for years. Then Charlotte smiled softly. "You gave me everything, my education, my home, my life." Long pause. "And Laura gave me life itself." The room became silent, because somehow those words held perfect truth. Meanwhile, Victoria gently touched Charlotte's face, then whispered, "We always knew this day might come." Charlotte looked surprised. Meanwhile, Richard stood slowly, then walked toward old cabinet. After a few moments, he returned carrying an envelope, yellowed with age, sealed for 25 years. Charlotte looked confused, then Richard quietly explained, "When we adopted you, your records included this." Charlotte carefully opened the envelope and instantly froze. Inside was a letter, written by Laura 25 years ago. Tears immediately filled Charlotte's eyes, because she recognized handwriting from note Laura showed earlier. Slowly, she began reading. "My beautiful daughter, if you're reading this someday, please know I never wanted losing you." Charlotte completely broke down crying, because suddenly she realized everyone in this story suffered. Laura, Emma, Richard, Victoria, even herself, all victims of the same tragedy. Meanwhile, Victoria softly hugged Charlotte and whispered, "You don't have to choose between families." Long pause. "You have both." The sentence changed everything, because suddenly Charlotte understood something beautiful. Finding Laura didn't mean losing Richard and Victoria. Love wasn't limited. Family wasn't competition. Hearts could grow larger, not smaller. Later that night, Charlotte arranged dinner. One table, two families: Laura, Emma, Richard, Victoria, and herself. The first real family dinner in 25 years. Nobody knew exactly what the future looked like, but for first time, they would face it together, as family. The restaurant was quiet. Warm lights glowed softly. Piano music played gently in background. And inside private dining room, 6 people sat around one table: Laura, Emma, Charlotte, Richard, Victoria, and 25 years of lost time. Meanwhile, nobody knew what to say first, because honestly, this wasn't normal family dinner. This was reunion, a family rebuilding itself after quarter of century apart. Then suddenly, Richard raised glass softly and smiled. "To second chances." Everyone smiled immediately, because somehow those 3 words perfectly described everything. Glasses touched gently, and for first time that evening, tension began disappearing. Meanwhile, Charlotte looked around table quietly, then laughed softly. "You know what's funny?" Everyone looked at her. Meanwhile, she pointed toward Emma. "We ordered the exact same food." Emma blinked, then looked down at menu, and immediately started laughing too. because it was true. Same steak, same drink, same dessert. Meanwhile, Laura watched both daughters laughing together, and tears quietly filled her eyes because suddenly she saw proof they were truly sisters, not only by blood, by nature. Then Victoria smiled warmly. "You both even laugh the same way." The room immediately filled with laughter again. Meanwhile, Charlotte turned toward Emma, then curiously asked, "What was your childhood like?" Emma smiled sadly, then began telling stories. Small apartment, part-time jobs, helping Laura pay bills, wearing second-hand clothes, studying late at night, never having much money. Meanwhile, Charlotte listened silently because her childhood looked completely different. Private schools, luxury vacations, birthday parties, expensive gifts, everything. Then suddenly, Emma smiled. "But honestly, I never felt poor." Everyone looked surprised. Meanwhile, Emma glanced toward Laura, then softly said, "Because Mom always made me feel rich." Laura immediately began crying because hearing those words healed wounds carried for decades. Meanwhile, Charlotte quietly reached for Laura's hand, then whispered, "I wish I'd had that too." Silence filled the room, not uncomfortable silence, emotional silence, because suddenly everyone understood something important. Money and love aren't the same thing. Charlotte had wealth. Emma had presence. Both lost something. Both gained something. Then suddenly, Victoria looked toward Emma and smiled. "You know, I always wanted another daughter." Emma immediately laughed through tears. Meanwhile, Richard nodded, "And I always wanted too." The room exploded into laughter again, because somehow, for first time, this felt like family, real family. Meanwhile, dessert arrived, chocolate cake, strawberries, candles. Then everyone looked confused, because nobody's birthday was today. Meanwhile, Charlotte smiled mischievously, then softly whispered, "It is." Everyone looked surprised. Charlotte pointed toward herself and Emma, then quietly said, "We missed 25 birthdays together." Pause. "So let's celebrate one now." Laura immediately covered her mouth crying because suddenly 25 lost years felt present inside the room. Meanwhile, the waiter lit 2 candles, one for Emma, one for Charlotte. Then softly, Laura stood up, tears falling freely, and for the first time in 25 years, she sang happy birthday to both daughters together. Her voice trembled, broke, recovered, and everyone joined in. Richard, Victoria, Emma, Charlotte, even nearby staff. By the time song ended, nobody at table had dry eyes. Then softly, Laura whispered, "This is the first birthday I've ever had both my girls together." The sentence shattered everyone emotionally because suddenly they realized how much time had been stolen, but also how much future remained. Meanwhile, Charlotte reached toward Emma reached toward Laura, and Richard placed hand over theirs. Then Victoria added hers too. One by one, every hand joined, creating a circle. Family, finally complete. And for the first time in 25 years, nobody felt missing anymore. For the first time in 25 years, everyone felt happy. Not temporarily, not politely, truly happy. The family dinner ended with laughter, photographs, stories, plans for future, and honestly, it felt like life finally repaired itself. But fate wasn't finished yet. Meanwhile, 3 days later, Charlotte visited Richard and Victoria's mansion, just like she had thousands of times before. Only this time, something felt different, because now she knew truth. She knew where she came from, and suddenly old questions returned, questions nobody answered fully. Meanwhile, inside Richard's office, Charlotte noticed old storage box sitting near bookshelf. Dust covered it, forgotten, ignored for years. Then something caught her attention. one label: adoption files. Charlotte froze because deep down, curiosity suddenly became impossible ignoring. Slowly, she opened box. Inside sat dozens of documents, old letters, medical records, legal paperwork, and then one folder. Her name, Charlotte Bennett, not Anderson, Bennett, her original name. Meanwhile, Charlotte carefully opened folder. At first, everything looked normal. Hospital papers, custody records, adoption approval documents. Then suddenly, one page changed everything. Charlotte's hands started shaking because hidden among papers was a document she had never seen before. A court request filed 25 years ago by Laura Bennett, requesting return of custody, requesting suspension of adoption. Request denied. Charlotte stared silently, heart racing faster, because suddenly another document appeared underneath, a letter, addressed to Richard and Victoria, never opened, never answered. The letter read, "Please, I am recovering. I can care for my daughter now. Please let me see her." Tears instantly filled Charlotte's eyes because the date shocked her. Laura sent it only 8 months after adoption, not years later, months. Meanwhile, Charlotte continued reading. Then another letter, and another, and another. Dozens, all from Laura, all begging for contact, all unanswered. The room suddenly felt cold because one terrifying possibility appeared. What if Laura didn't lose Charlotte completely by accident? What if someone helped keep them apart? Meanwhile, that evening, Charlotte arrived at Laura's house emotionally shaken. Emma immediately noticed. What's wrong? Charlotte couldn't answer right away because, honestly, she didn't know what to believe anymore. Then, finally, she placed stack of letters on the table. Laura looked confused until she saw handwriting, her handwriting, and instantly went pale because she recognized every letter, every plea, every desperate attempt contacting daughter. Then, softly, Laura whispered, "Where did you find these?" Charlotte's voice trembled. "In Dad's office." The room became silent, not emotional silence, dangerous silence. Meanwhile, Emma looked between both women nervously because suddenly she sensed something was terribly wrong. Then Charlotte asked a question nobody wanted hearing, a question capable of destroying everything. "Mom?" Tears filled her eyes. "Did they know you were looking for me?" Laura slowly closed her eyes because after 25 years, the truth she feared most finally stood before them. Then quietly whispered, "Yes." Emma froze. Charlotte stopped breathing. Meanwhile, Laura continued through tears. They knew. Long pause, and they never answered. The world seemed to stop because suddenly Charlotte didn't know what hurt more, losing 25 years or learning they might have been preventable. Then, softly, through broken voice, she whispered, "Why would they do that?" Nobody had answer. Not yet. But one thing became clear. The reunion that brought the family together might soon tear it apart again. The question hung heavily in the room. Why would they do that? Charlotte's voice trembled. Tears filled her eyes. Because suddenly, everything she believed about her childhood felt uncertain. Meanwhile, Laura sat silently staring at old letters spread across a table. 25 years of unanswered prayers. 25 years of heartbreak. 25 years of wondering why nobody responded. And now, the truth was finally demanding answers. Meanwhile, Emma quietly reached for Charlotte's hand. Because despite everything, Charlotte looked devastated. Not angry, devastated. Because suddenly she felt trapped between two families she loved. One family who gave her life, and one family who raised her. Then, softly, Laura whispered, "You deserve the truth." Long pause. All of it. Meanwhile, Charlotte nodded slowly, then stood up, and for first time in her life, she drove toward the Anderson mansion not as daughter seeking comfort, but as woman seeking answers. That evening, Richard and Victoria sat inside living room when Charlotte arrived. Immediately, they noticed something wrong. Her eyes were red, her expression cold, and in her hands she carried a stack of letters. Meanwhile, Richard instantly recognized them, and his face turned pale, because suddenly he knew the secret was over. Then Charlotte slowly placed letters onto coffee table. Silence filled the room. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. Finally, through trembling voice, Charlotte asked, "Did you know my mother was looking for me?" Victoria immediately burst into tears. Richard lowered his head, and that silence answered everything. Meanwhile, Charlotte felt her heart break, because deep down she had hoped for a different answer. Then, softly, she whispered, "You knew." Victoria cried harder. Richard closed his eyes painfully. Then, finally, after 25 years, he answered, "Yes." The word shattered the room completely. Meanwhile, Charlotte stepped backward emotionally, because suddenly the people she trusted most had hidden part of her life. Then Richard slowly stood, not defensive, not angry, broken, because he carried guilt for years too. Then quietly said, "When we adopted you, we were terrified." Charlotte stared silently. Meanwhile, Richard continued, "Your mother began writing letters, calling, asking for visits." Long pause. "And every time, we feared losing you." Victoria covered her face crying, because finally the truth escaped. Not hatred, not cruelty, fear. Only fear. Meanwhile, couldn't believe what she was hearing. Then whispered, "So you chose for me?" Nobody answered, because they had. Then Victoria looked toward Charlotte through tears and softly whispered, "We loved you." The sentence hurt even more, because Charlotte knew it was true. Richard and Victoria loved her deeply, but love mixed with fear had caused terrible mistake. Meanwhile, Victoria cried uncontrollably now, then softly said, "We convinced ourselves we were protecting you." Long pause. But really, we were protecting ourselves. Silence crushed the room, because suddenly the truth became painfully clear. Richard and Victoria feared Charlotte discovering Laura, feared losing daughter, feared becoming second choice, and because of that fear, they helped keep mother and daughter apart for 25 years. Meanwhile, Charlotte sat down slowly, tears falling freely now, because honestly, she didn't know how feeling: angry, sad, heartbroken, grateful, all at same time. Then, softly, she asked one final question carrying 25 years of loss. "Do you regret it?" The room became silent again. Meanwhile, Richard looked toward family photographs covering the wall. Photos of birthdays, graduations, vacations, memories. Then tears filled his eyes, and quietly answered, "Every single day." Victoria nodded immediately, because despite gaining a daughter, they knew someone else lost one. Then, suddenly, Charlotte began crying harder, not because she hated them, because she saw their pain too. They weren't villains. They were frightened parents who made a terrible decision, a decision that hurt everyone. Then, slowly, Charlotte stood up, walked toward Richard and Victoria, and hugged them both tightly. The couple immediately broke down crying, because suddenly they feared this might be goodbye. Then, through tears, Charlotte whispered, "I love you." Both of them cried harder. But then she added, "And I love Laura too." Long pause. "I'm not choosing." The sentence changed everything, because family wasn't something divided. Family could grow. Family could heal. Family could forgive, even after 25 years. For several days after the truth came out, nobody knew what would happen next. Not Laura, not Richard, not Victoria, not even Charlotte, because forgiveness sounds beautiful, but living through betrayal is much harder. Meanwhile, Charlotte spent long hours alone, walking through city parks, thinking, remembering, trying to understand 25 years of complicated emotions, because deep down, she loved everyone involved: Laura, Emma, Richard, Victoria, and somehow that made everything harder. Meanwhile, Richard barely slept. Every night he replayed same memories, the letters, the phone calls, the decisions, and for first time he stopped justifying them, because deep down he knew fear had stolen 25 years from someone else. Meanwhile, Victoria cried almost every day because suddenly she feared losing Charlotte forever, the same fear that caused all this pain in the first place. Then one morning, Charlotte called everyone, Laura, Emma, Richard, Victoria, and asked them meeting at local park, the same park where families gathered every weekend. Children laughed nearby, birds sang softly, life continued peacefully around them. Meanwhile, the 5 adults stood awkwardly facing each other, nobody knowing what to say, because sometimes the most important conversations begin with silence. Then, finally, Richard stepped forward, his eyes already filled with tears, and quietly whispered, "Laura." The woman looked up slowly. Then Richard continued, "I'm sorry. Not excuse, not explanation, only apology, real apology, the kind arriving from heart." Meanwhile, Laura stared at him, 25 years of pain standing between them. Then Richard's voice broke. "We stole moments that belonged to you." Tears rolled down his face now. Birthdays, school plays, graduations. Pause. "And I can never give them back." The park became silent because everyone knew he was right. Some things cannot be returned. Meanwhile, Victoria stepped forward too, crying openly, then softly whispered, "I was afraid." Long pause. "So afraid losing Charlotte." Long pause. "That I forgot another mother was already hurting." Laura immediately began crying too, because suddenly she saw something she hadn't expected: regret, real regret. Meanwhile, Emma quietly held Charlotte's hand, watching everything unfold. Then, suddenly, Laura stepped toward Richard and Victoria. Everyone held their breath, because nobody knew what she would do. Then, softly, through tears, she whispered, "I hated you for years." Richard lowered his eyes. Victoria cried harder. Meanwhile, Laura continued, "But carrying hate became exhausting." Long pause. "And my daughters deserve better." The sentence shocked everyone, because suddenly forgiveness stood within reach. Then Laura slowly opened her arms and hugged Victoria. Victoria immediately collapsed into tears, because after 25 years, the woman she hurt most offered grace. Then Laura hugged Richard too, and for several moments, all 3 cried together, not because pain disappeared, because healing finally began. Meanwhile, Charlotte couldn't stop crying, because honestly, she never believed seeing this day. Her 2 families, together, not fighting, not competing, healing. Then, suddenly, Emma smiled through tears and jokingly whispered, "Can we stop making strangers cry in public?" Everyone laughed immediately, even through tears, because sometimes laughter is the first sign hearts are healing. Meanwhile, a photographer walking nearby noticed the group, then offered taking a picture. One simple family photograph. Everyone gathered together: Laura, Emma, Charlotte, Richard, Victoria, standing side by side, smiling, crying, family. Finally. The camera clicked, and in that single moment, 25 years of pain met 25 years of love. Neither erased the other, but together, they created something stronger: forgiveness. 1 year later, life looked completely different. Not because the past disappeared, not because 25 years suddenly returned, because everyone finally stopped living inside old wounds and started building new memories together. Meanwhile, Laura smiled more than she had in decades. For 25 years, she lived with guilt, pain, regret, and endless questions. But now, both daughters sat beside her, not in dreams, not in photographs, in real life. Meanwhile, Emma and Charlotte became inseparable. Phone calls every day, family dinners every week, vacations together, birthdays together, everything they missed growing up. And honestly, sometimes they still laughed about how similar they were. Same favorite foods, same jokes, same terrible dancing, same habit of finishing each other's sentences, because some connections survive even 25 years apart. Meanwhile, Richard and Victoria slowly became part of larger family too. At first, things felt awkward, understandably, but healing takes time, and day by day, trust returned. One conversation, one meal, one memory at a time. Then one sunny spring morning, Charlotte had a crazy idea, an emotional idea. The entire family gathered at Old Lakeside Park, the same place where Emma played as a child, the same place Laura often visited alone while praying for Charlotte's return. Meanwhile, a professional photographer waited nearby. Everyone looked confused, except Charlotte. Then she smiled and revealed a giant photo album. The first page showed newborn twins, the hospital photograph, the beginning of everything. Immediately, Laura began crying, because 25 years earlier, that was the last time she saw both daughters together. Meanwhile, Charlotte turned page. The next pages contained photographs from the reunion year, family dinners, birthday celebrations, holiday gatherings, smiles everywhere, love everywhere. Then suddenly, Charlotte reached final page. Blank. Completely blank. Everyone looked confused. Then softly she whispered, "This page is for today." The photographer smiled and asked everyone gathering together. Meanwhile, Laura stood between Emma and Charlotte, for first time since they were newborn babies. Richard stood beside Victoria. Emma held Charlotte's hand, Charlotte held Laura's, and suddenly nobody felt broken anymore. Not because tragedy never happened, because love survived it. Then the photographer counted. 3, 2, 1. Click. The camera captured something beautiful. Not perfect family, real family, a family that got lost, a family that suffered, a family that forgave, a family that found its way back together. Meanwhile, later that evening, everyone sat beside a lake watching the sunset. Golden light reflected across the water, peaceful, quiet, beautiful. Then Emma softly asked, "If Dad could see us now?" The group became silent, because everyone thought about Michael, the man whose death started everything. Meanwhile, Laura smiled through tears, then looked toward her daughters and softly whispered, "He can." Long pause, and I think he's smiling. Immediately, everyone's eyes filled with tears, because somehow it felt true. Then Charlotte rested her head on Laura's shoulder. Emma held her mother's hand, and for several minutes, nobody spoke, because some moments don't need words, only presence, only love, only family. And as the sun slowly disappeared beyond the horizon, Laura looked at both daughters, the daughters she thought she lost forever, then quietly whispered, "My girls," the same words she spoke the day they reunited, but this time there was no sadness, no fear, no separation, only gratitude, because after 25 years, the family finally came home. Sometimes life separates people through tragedy, mistakes, and fear, but love has extraordinary way of surviving distance. 25 years apart could not break what was always meant to be together, because family is not only about blood, it is about forgiveness, it is about sacrifice, it is about finding each other again when everything seems lost. And sometimes, the happiest endings are not about getting back the past, they are about finally having the future you thought was impossible.